So, yeah, I've got you after lunch, and hopefully I can get through this before the sort of sugar rush starts to crush down and you train your food goals.
Just throw things in it.
Just, yeah, you do. Hands up anyone who's familiar with Firebase? Anyone familiar with Flutter? Yeah. Okay, good. This is the app that I kind of run it through is Firebase, but there's not too much about it. If you're not familiar with Flutter, it's okay, you're not penalized. And in terms of Firebase, there's a couple of its products that, you know, even if you haven't used Firebase before, will be pretty obvious to you. But essentially, this is looking at the Firebase Emulator Suite, which is something that you can install on your local machine, run, and somewhat have a good emulation of a decent number of Firebase products just on your machine. So let's run through it. Senior software engineer, sort of changing things up a little bit soon, being a technical lead, hence that previous session was pretty good for me. Some of my socials, as you can tell, I'm not that social, so it's very code oriented. And yeah, we'll be sharing the slides. So if later you want to follow me on GitHub or send me an email because it's the 20th century, feel free to do that. Yeah. So firstly, the why. When we want to, some of the reasons we might want to use the Firebase Emulator Suite are, you want to get into it without a lot of overhead. You might be in an organization where you're trying to pitch to your technical lead or the other members of your team, hey, we'd like to use this suite of products. And you might not have authority to go spend some company budget on some new, to spin up any kind of instances in a cloud environment. But this is something that you can do quite easily, very low overhead. You can also trial new Firebase products that you're not yet using alongside Firebase products that you are using. So if you were already using Firecloud's Firestore DB, then you would be able to trial, say for example, Firebase Auth, just talking to an emulator. So you can mix and match some of these things.
Just a point, you can make a Firebase project. You will have to do a credit card, but you can run it without costing anything.
Yeah, no more questions from the Firebase. Yeah, and it will probably come down to you might be at a large organization that has some rules around even setting up. You might be at an organization where you need to go to a different department to sort of start to set things up. But you're right. A lot of these cloud services really try to make it easy for you to get in anyway. One use case I find really useful is being able to run tests against a non-shared environment. There's pros and cons of either option. Having a team of 8 or so developers trying to work against a single shared test environment can often go wrong for a number of reasons. If they can all have their own easy to spin up test environment locally, then that has many advantages. And local application development, similar for that previous reason, but maybe just for as they're developing, depending on how they like to develop, then they can just locally be talking to a Firestore DB or some other Firebase product. So I guess then what can you actually emulate? Sort of a list of products here, really. So Auth is the sort of, I guess, like the most useful thing if you really want to, if you want to handle users, you want to then use some of those Auth credentials in your Firebase real-time database access. Then you can easily simulate and see how these authentication objects and users are modeled. Firestore real-time DB. Those are two separate similar products. Storage, when you need to store files and not data. Google Cloud Functions. Hosting, so this would be, if you want to actually have a Firebase hosted website, this might be the entrance point to your web application. Extensions, and publish, subscribe, Google's publicized way of and that can be emulated locally. There are a couple of things that it doesn't yet do. No real clear definition as to whether this is on the roadmap, but the one main thing that I was disappointed in is it didn't support remote config. So there are times when it have been lovely if I could get integration tests that also check that given a feature flag is switched on, this happens. When it's switched off, something else happens. That doesn't exist, so that's a kind of boundary point where you still might need your tests to use some sort of mocking to, if this were talking to remote config, it would tell me it's switched on, which is a little bit of a disappointment, but something we can probably live with. And, the obvious caveat is this isn't for self-hosting production things. This is great for your local develop machine, but don't chuck it on the server and try to get clients talking to it. So what I got out of this little project, and I guess giving that a little bit about myself, is I'm usually full stack. Backend, I'm usually dealing with Microsoft Azure, apologies, and I had the experience of working a fair bit with Flutter and native Android with some Firebase projects. And for a new project, we were heavily leveraging Firebase. I wanted to get a whole range of integration tests. Problem with the old project was none of them existed. So I wanted to be able to run the actual app I wanted to run the app on an actual device and have it talking in some cases maybe to an actual backend system that we have. We really need to do some end-to-end tests, but to get faster feedback, I wanted it talking to emulations of Firebase. So that's when I really got interested in this, decided to check it out, and essentially did this presentation. So I found it was extremely good for BDD. This code base that I share, we kind of start with the main branch there is no Firebase to speak of. There's no actual data store. It's all in memory. But all the BDD styled integration tests, pretty much the same. There's a couple of test setup steps that need to be included once there is data. But by and large, those tests didn't really need to change at all. I found that, some of the things, I had some assumptions from other technologies about what I could do, say like a user. I assumed we'd be able to save some metadata about a user. So from Firebase Auth, I was expecting things like, I've got a user, I want to say that the organization that the user is in. I felt like I should be able to save that into the user's kind of little profile or metadata that goes along with it. That you can't. So very early on, before actually using Firebase, I was able to sanity check some of my assumptions and realize where I was wrong and course correct before I've spent too much development effort on it.
Can you do that in Firebase?
Can I do what? No. Firebase in terms of like the real-time database?
Well, so what you're trying to do, I don't think so it wasn't that it could do what you wanted to do. It was not doing what the product was doing.
Yeah, so this wasn't a problem with the emulator. It was not even really a problem. It's just kind of where, I guess, the teeth. Exactly. Yeah, and I was able to learn that before sort of going too far down the path of Firebase. If I was kind of exploring this as a potential technology, if that were a blocker, I could sort of consider some other cloud vendors. That particular thing isn't really going to be the one that, acts as that whole technology suite, though. I found this extremely easy to debug security rules, and I'll show you how we can do that in the emulator. Verified concurrency controls using transactions. So, this project uses Firestore DB, and it's a document-oriented DB. And there's a couple. I wanted to leverage transactions for the purposes of this very basic-looking app that you'll see. The way that if you're writing tests for this and you're starting to do mocks in, say, it's like a unit test, and you're kind of mocking and saying, well, when I try to do this, my mock says that it should throw an exception. I mean, you can go down that route, but you're really kind of lying to yourself, because you're faking out behavior from a third party. It's not a great position to be in. Obviously, this is still kind of fake. This is an emulator, but it is supported by the actual company that gives you the actual tools. So you get a little bit closer to the kind of the author telling you how this thing should actually operate in production. Some easy debugging of Cloud Functions. So Cloud Functions, I use JavaScript, and I made about 1,001 typos, other stupid little mistakes. Having to redeploy that every time into a new instance would have been time-consuming at best, disruptive at worst if they were doing something quite important. I found that, Firebase errors. So again, this is Flutter, so it kind of depends on the platform you're running on. I found that I was getting different exceptions. Really surprisingly, I was getting different errors whether I was on targeting Android. I'll get a nice Firebase exception, and I could see details in there. When I went and ran that on web, I just got error, and I had to handle that in quite a different way. I had to detect that error in a different way. So yeah, I got a fair bit out of it. There is a repo for this for you to have a look at. If you scan the QR code, you'll just go to the repo. I'm going to jump out of this and head to VS Code with a little emulator. I've got a bit of a cheat sheet next to me here as well. I've already got my emulator going, so I can skip that step. So I will just run the app for now in Chrome. I want to use that for, the simulator, yes, the Android simulator on the right for some integration tests. Those integration tests will take a little while. It's just going to be running through it, and in the meantime, I'll show you through some code. This is one of the things I really love about Flutter. By and large, I was able to just think, oh, I actually want to run this on web now, and I was able to. I think it might have even just been that exception or error that's different. That was the only thing that caught me out between the two environments. So I'm gonna log in, and hopefully I can remember Bob's. I think everyone probably guessed what Bob's password was. If you didn't, it was, can we fix it? Cool. So it's a to-do app, which I'm sure everyone has had enough of by now. And I might also say that this is not going to be a talk about how to do good UI. It does not look pleasant to see, but it does give me enough structure and enough, I guess, substance to show you some of the features that Firebase and Firestore can give you. Thank you. It's functional, isn't it? Very functional. It's usually functional when it works. So yeah, you can create some to-dos. You can mark them as completed. You can mark them as uncompleted, and then of course you can delete some. I might just delete both. This is the main branch of the app. There is no Firebase. There's no data being stored. If I start this up again, well, even if I created it to do and I restarted this, you know, there would be nothing there. The bob@gmail.com exists only in memory and in code. And that's it. So I think the next step of the cheat sheets is to start running these integration tests. And sometimes I wish that my fingerprint doesn't look different sometimes. So I will step on over to I step on over to the Firebase, the branch using Firebase Emulator Suite. There are a couple of changes. Let me just show run emulators.sh. I didn't want to run too much through how to install, things like this, how to install and set it up. A lot of that is very well documented already. I've put this a little bit of a helper shell script to essentially run it. I didn't even have to set up a Firebase project for this. You're able to run projects that don't exist as long as they start with the term demo dash. That being said, if you wanted to set one up, it's not too difficult to set up a Firebase project. So I'm going to run the emulators. There's a couple of different ways that you can run these as well. Should double check. Is the size of the text quite okay for people? No, if you put the back, just give this a squint maybe. So there's a couple of different ways you can run these emulators. You could do Firebase emulators exec is a quite popular one and quite common one. And what you would do is give it, say, hey, I want to run my tests, my integration tests. And essentially it'll start the emulators, run whatever script or whatever command you just gave it, and then it will shut those emulators down again once it's finished. So that could be quite a nice way in the CI pipeline, not have to worry about some extra step to spin them up, something else to stop them, but just all in one command. That's a nice little utility. You can start with an import of so import. And pretty much just a path to some previously exported data. What does it give you? Probably a CSV or some JSON formatted data. But yeah, you could use this in your tests if you had some data that you wanted to seed before you ran any of those tests. It would be quite a simple way. Or again, for your local development, when your developers are just trying to get in there and start using the app, then there can be a user preceded for them. We don't need to do any of that. The other command. From a live environment. No, so you can whatever you've already got in your emulators. You could have run the emulators, done some things manually, got some users. You could create that. You could create a collection in Firestore, emulator Firestore, and then just export that. You wouldn't need to have done that in an automated way at all. And then that gives you your seed data.
Catching in known state, starting testing.
Yeah. I didn't leverage that. I mean, not for any good reason, but pretty much I was, trundling my way through and had already got to a state where the tests themselves would set up the test data. And that's just kind of the way it went about. So from there, we can run the integration tests now with our emulators ready to go. Flutter test, integration test. I'll just point out that, yes, this will take a while. There's a few integration tests. Anything ending test it'll find and run all the tests inside it. And it's going to build this, it's going to build the app for each test entry point. So for each of those test suites, it's going to build a new one. And so that's why you'll see it building for a while. Every now and again, you'll see the phone start to run through, and you probably get totally distracted and not worry about what I'm saying. But there we go. We can start to see that would be the login tests. Already started there. And so I might just let that go about its business and start to walk through maybe just a little bit about now that we're using Firebase Emulator. You know, how do we deal with it from our tests? There are some things with it that we can leverage that you wouldn't usually be able to leverage in a Firebase environment. One thing, for example, is there's some utilities for completely wiping, you know, all of your files and data. Your live environment at any point in time. But the emulator has a nice for you, so that after each and every test, I'm able to just say, hey, just delete this test data, and then start from scratch. Seeing the test users, I'm able to make use of Firebase's SDKs, so I don't have to. In this first example, it is pretty raw that I did have to go, you know, I've got a little HTTP client and here's the URL and deal with the HTTP responses that it gives me. But where it exists, you can leverage the SDK, which just, you know, you get a bit of type safety, and the API is just a bit sort of simpler for me anyway. Harder to get things wrong. So yeah, you can see the phone going a bit crazy on the right there. I'll walk you through some of the other test files then. So login tests, for example, most of these are, you know, if you want to set up all the tests, then we do need to initialize. And so that basically calls into the app the same way of initializing. Really, all we need to worry about is, hey, Firebase itself, we need to initialize the app. This is something that you would do whether you were using emulator or not. The details that I can give it, because this is an app that's so far only ever trying to deal with the emulator, some of the details that I can give it are a little fake. So API key, project ID was the same the same fake project that I made up when I started the emulator. So as long as those match, then everything, I'm going to be good to go. Those lines down here, we're basically just saying to both of them, hey, we want to use the faster emulator. Once this is a productionized app, this would be very much something you might have a kind of switch on. Well, it might simply be a switch on the, hey, are we in debug mode? Are we just running tests in debug mode, and therefore always want to use the emulator, and no productionized version of the app would ever go down that path of things. You have some options there. Then you sort of get way back out there. Other than that, very simple tests. The user is first greeted with a login page. So I would have started with this even before I had Firebase in place, and it was simply things, mostly extension methods. So you know, you get this a very nice, easy to read way of saying, hey, we want to run the app, and then I expect to find the text login. I want to run the app. I'm going to log in with a username and password, something is incorrect, and I'm going to find a certain text. This was to me how I got a lot of use out of BDD. Helped me sort of run the development of this app, and then when it came to switching major, when it went from in memory to Firestore and Firebase Auth. Despite that, all I really needed to do was say, okay, I want to initialize, and I want to delete some test data and see some test users. I didn't need to change how many of those tests were working. I didn't need to sort of go in and say, this new thing has to be mocked or anything else. So that was really quite successful in this little project for verifying behavior. Right, I won't bore you too much with any more of those tests, and it looks like all those test runs was successful. There was one skipped test. I'll try to get to that one. We'll see how we go for time. Then we might want to see from our main, we have already seen from our main.dart how we initialize all that. I used to do this. So then I might just go to item store. And then essentially this was the thing, and also log in. So I guess these were two main points where we see some use of the emulated Firebase products. So when we're in that login screen and we try to authenticate a user, this is incredibly helpful for me. I was able to verify that when we try to sign in with an email and password, that we can get the Firebase Auth exception. Previously when it was just in memory, it was a case of, hey, this thing doesn't match. I didn't find this fake user. There's a problem here. So before anything else, I was able to easily find out what kind of exceptions is this Firebase product going to throw for me, and then start course correcting for new error handling before we're deploying into any environments. Log in. Do I install?
Did you find?
No.
Finding emulator section finds like error messages. So you've got the same error messages that you use. On each of this, I want to see that they get Firebase Android, except Firebase exception, the Firebase exception.
Yeah.
Have you ran on the emulator actually get
So that brings me back to that previous one. Is unfortunately I don't have an iOS device, so the donations at the end will be appreciated. But so going from Android to web, that's when I noticed that there's some inconsistencies. Obviously, it comes down. It would be great for a developer experience for them all to be the same. I imagine there's a large swath of different teams that are working on these, and things get lost in translation when it comes to how do we actually do error handling consistently.
you discover that from the emulator before you at least got the wrong error, like the different errors.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
The Android interface and the web interface.
Yeah.
So you think that they have consistent errors, but it's not. The environment is different. So
Yeah. There's always going to be differences, right? When it comes to like exceptions in JavaScript, like I don't really have any kind of concept of exceptions, and you have to target it to JavaScript developers who are not used to this thing. And anyway, but short answer, you could get confidence in how different platforms deal with Firebase via their SDKs before you're going live. The downside of questions where I've got like a goldfish in memory, so I'm already. So I was going through the login screen, told you about the Firebase Auth exceptions. No, don't be sorry. It is my handicap. I was going to take it to to-do item store. Yeah, yeah. You mean like a sort of like a hosted cloud? From that perspective, a bit like browser stack. So you want to sort of like an environment where you can run on different devices. And yeah. Yeah, and I think they're pretty good for testing security rules as well for that kind of thing. So yeah, I have a little typical repository-like interface. I want to be able to create to-dos, get them all, save them all, delete them all. And the emulator helps with all this. I was able to debug through a ton of usual errors that you come up across. Even things like I mentioned, you can't really have user metadata in Firebase Auth, but I was able to put that in Firestore Cloud, which is generally the kind of advice. So I was able to program all together that process of, okay, there's a new user, stitch together the, what we've got from them from Firebase Auth with what we've got from them in Firestore Cloud. Stitch that together so you get a kind of a more complete picture of this user. I just wanted to have basic information like what organization is this user in. So the first thing it sort of does is resolves that there's a current user, sort of fetches it if it hasn't got it already. We're able to, it's quite simple, just basically says, go to the to-dos collection for a particular to-do ID. I was able to test serialization to and from Firebase. So what I often see is when there's testing and you mock out the thing that you're actually writing to, everything seems hunky-dory. You've got a nice little object that you say, I save it to this thing and I retrieve it from that thing. But invariably, there'll be maybe a property with a data type that the database isn't like, or in some scenarios, it might just be that it never actually gets written or it never gets deserialized and it gets lost. So a lot of nice little wins from that. I can be sure that Firestore DB itself can handle this data if I'm going to put in it. Trying to remember, even just like little wins, such as when we go to save all, there's a small difference in Firestore DB between batch and transactions. So batch, I just say, I want to save in one batch more than one, changes to more than one document, and you just give it in one atomic operation. But you can also start a transaction. And the main difference there is, hey, I'm going to operate on more than one document, or it might actually just be one document, but you might want to do it to more than one document. And it's important that if anyone modifies one of these before I'm finished, then I want to, it's transactional. I want to sort of bail on this. I want that to fail. So I had looking at the time, may or may not be able to show you in the app, a functionality where if you're someone who's trying to delete a to-do list task that somebody else has made, you're trying to delete that at the point where they have modified it, both those things happen at the same time, and I want this thing to fail. I don't want to be deleting something that somebody else has just completed or uncompleted or modified in any way. So this was able to verify that given the way that I'm using this transaction, given the way that I'm deleting, I've set max attempts to 1. Essentially, I just want to give it a go. If it doesn't work because somebody's modified it, don't try again. And it also pointed out that, yeah, you really do need to actually try to fetch that thing that you're about to operate on. Otherwise, it doesn't know that your transaction cares about that document. So there was a ton of things that this helped me debug just at the emulator level and verify. The test for that then, and this would have ran and passed before, but it even got to the point where I could write tests such as, so deleting a to-do while someone else completes it, throws a to-do item modified exception. And that means that, okay, I've seeded a bunch of to-do lists, to-dos, I guess. It's always convoluted for me to say. I'm going to save them. There's probably like about 100. There's a high number of them. And I'm going to, essentially, I'm going to have a feature or a kind of task or something that will evaluate in future of deleting it, of modifying all those to-dos and also of deleting all of those to-dos. And I was able to say when both of those things happen at the same time, there'll be a to-do item modified exception. And that was like a point where I was like, this is really cool. It's not just checking very basic things. It's even evaluating exceptions. So in terms of time, I'm running, I guess, a little bit behind, and I do want to show you the UI that you get with it. Is it already open there? No? Okay. Because a few of your potential questions might be answered there. So it does give you a beautiful little UI to go and check all these things. And while I'm talking, I might just rerun the integration tests because they're going to start doing stuff for this, and that might or might not be pretty interesting or still just boring to look at. But yeah, you can go through and see. There's kind of an authentication section for the Firebase Emulator. There's all the good old Bob and Bill and Jill, all those users that I've created and seeded. They're here. There's the other one I'm leveraging a fair bit is FirestoreDB. This might start to change as I'm talking, depending on whether this is, yes, but it's building at the moment. But this was the user metadata that I needed to store in FirestoreDB. So it's very much a case of a collection of users, sort of keyed by their username. It's not how I'm sort of saying that everyone should do that, but it was fine for this little product. And then whatever kind of metadata that you wanted to have there. Those tests are running, so you're going to start to see a number of little documents that get spun up and deleted. Requests, so we can track all these requests that are happening in FirestoreDB at the moment. The place where we can see our security rules getting evaluated. So this was supposed to fail. So the delete was all good. The delete failing was all good. It was meant to fail due to security rules failing, and then I would handle that exception as expected. And yeah, we were able to see what the offending security rule was. So a lot of good stuff there. The last thing I'll then touch on is the overview functions. Failed to load function from definition, Firebase error parsing triggers, cannot find module Firebase functions logger. Awesome. So there you go. Emulator's helping me out it's already shown me that there's, since running this successfully before, there's an issue with my the cloud functions that we're going to run. They're very simple. They're just going to do some logging. But there's an issue with them. Awesome. Yeah, I think that sort of shows the emulator's UI, how you can use it in your app, whether it's Android or Flutter or iOS. I think we pretty much have to leave it there for questions.